Let's play Diablo II. I'm nearly to Mephisto. He should be right here. What in the hell is this? Welcome to Obscuros Ludos. I play obscure games. Is Diablo 2 scary for you? Would you prefer a bobblehead Funko Pop nightmare ripped off from Tales of Phantasia? Well, then probably consult a psychiatrist, but also Shenzhen Nanjing has the answer for you. Diablo for the NES, or as I like to call it, Diablo NES. Let me try to explain. In China, there's a small culture of video game bootlegging. Video game consoles, in particular the original Nintendo Entertainment System, or Famicom, and the Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive, have been cloned for lower and lower prices in order to make them accessible to the fairly poor masses of China. And with such consoles readily available, companies continued making games for them well into the 2010s, and companies like Shenzhen Nanjing Shenzhen Nanjing, to us Anglophones, continue to make games today. But China is also inundated with Western culture, so as long as they're bootlegging the consoles, these companies bootleg the games too, remaking popular games for other platforms onto far simpler systems that are more readily available in China. Shenzhen Nanjing has made hundreds of these games with mixed success, including Diablo II. Well, the cartridge says Diablo 2, and the actual story is from Diablo 2, but the game's title screen just says Diablo, so I don't know what I'm supposed to call it. Whatever. Anyway, I played a lot of Shenzhen Nanjing's games, and all of their RPGs are clearly based on the same engine that they iterate on over and over again for each game. So there's, shall we say, an absence of originality to them, but sometimes they do make it all work. World of Warcraft for NES, which I reviewed in an earlier video linked in the description below, was very nearly good. This game, it was at times almost a game, but good? No. Good it ain't. I have a theory about good game design. There are hundreds of aspects of a great game, the music, the graphics, the world building, but before you can ever be a great game, one must first be a good game. And to be a good game, there are just two aspects that matter in particular: the story and the gameplay. That's not to say that a good game needs to have a good story and good gameplay, but for a game to be good, either the story or the gameplay needs to be good, and the other needs to at least not get in the way. A fun game can be ruined by a bad story, but will still be fun with an anodyne story. A good story will be ruined by gameplay that isn't fun, but will still be a good story with gameplay that's uninventive, but at least unintrusive. The reason that's relevant here is I think most fans of the Diablo series would agree, and wouldn't mind my saying, that the Diablo series are games defined by their fun and engaging gameplay, in which the story mainly serves the role of just tying it together without getting in the way. There's no intrigue, there's no deep character development. It's a classic Mr. Bad comes to town, Mr. Good defeats him sort of plot. Totally fine as a driver for a game that's otherwise fun, but not a compelling story on its own. And that's where Diablo NES has fallen flat. This fun action role-playing game is adapted as a bog-standard turn-based role-playing game. There are, of course, good action role-playing games for the NES. Zelda, of course, comes to mind, but that's a tall order and a difficult programming job. Shenzhen Nanjing isn't a big company, and they're cranking out game after game. A turn-based RPG is just much simpler. And so this adaptation has no rushing hordes of enemies, no tactical boss fights, just pick a move and wait your turn. But it was the gameplay that was the good thing about Diablo. The story is pretty lean. So if they didn't take the gameplay, how is this connected to Diablo at all? Well, the answer is that what story there is does come from Diablo 2, sort of. If you're not familiar with the story, here it is in short. Diablo inhabits and corrupts the hero who defeated him in Diablo 1, who then becomes the so-called Dark Wanderer heading east. Always into the east. and spreading misery in his wake. The player, a new hero, must follow the trail and defeat him. Along the way, you meet other vengeful spirits of mythology, such as Baal and Mephisto, as well as lesser demons, each of which has unleashed their own bevy of foul monsters in their area. You defeat each and move on until reaching and killing Diablo. But that's sort of it. Kill some bosses, go towards the big boss, eventually reach him, kill the big boss. Fine for what it is, but not exactly the next great American novel, is it? Diablo for the NES diverges from that plot in only one important way. Instead of the player choosing the protagonist, there's a cast of protagonists built in and a slight backstory to them. Within this narrative, there were once 3 great heroes, and in times of need, those great heroes' descendants must reprise their brave mantles and save the world. Each of them acts as a protector and can only be convinced to join the grand quest against Diablo after one of Diablo's goons in the area has been defeated. Not the most exciting backstory in the world, but it at least explains why the protagonists are involved in the first place. Diablo II's story only sets in after all 3 heroes have been gathered. And to the game's credit, that's new. And they actually gave the heroes personalities, and those personalities last throughout the game. Otis Ray, the paladin and primary character, is proud and arrogant, but his acts reliably substantiate that ego. Hanks, the barbarian, is self-deprecating and a bit slow and very opinionated, but he always means well. Leah, the sorceress, is snippy and full of one-liner insults, but means it in jest and is always witty and supportive. By the way, that's not Leah, the ward of Deckard Cain in Diablo II, but Leah, the descendant of the great sorceress? Maybe? I don't know. They don't seem to be the same character. Whatever. Otis Ray is always the one to talk to the bosses, but the peanut gallery of Hanks and Leah always manage to get their snide remarks in, and it's genuinely amusing to get their running commentary, which definitely comes from Shenzhen Nanjing, not the original game. You have come for Klimt's heart. Not bad. You're a smart one. You actually guessed our intentions. You must be mad! You've defeated my predecessor! But I'm prepared to die. You're even more nervous than me. You're great. Big Head here is as full of wisdom as ever. You're just smarter than he is. I take it all back. I'm gonna destroy you idiots. If you only came here to hear positive things about Diablo NES, then now would be the time to stop watching. I really don't have anything positive left to say. They've put together a painfully typical RPG engine with the story of Diablo II and these 3 characters, and the characters are the closest to worthwhile that this game gets. The plot adaptation is fine, for all that it's a thin plot. We do have Deckard Cain as a usual companion to explain what mischief is going on in each of the lands we pass through, and we continue
East. Always. Into the east.
After Diablo, defeating his minions. With Baal and Mephisto, we're aided by the Archangel Tyrael, who is then corrupted by Diablo as part of the final boss battle. I could do a complete plot summary, but I kinda just did. There's nothing else really to say. Many RPGs are plagued by fetch quests. We want to do X, but to do that, first you have to fetch this plot item, which lets you fetch this other plot item, etc., etc. But this game only really had one bad one. We have to find the gem, rod, and Horadric cube in order to rebuild the scepter, in order to break the seal, in order to enter the tomb, in order to kill Baal, in order to stop the monsters, in order to release the quarantine, in order to secure the use of a ship, in order to go east, in order to follow Diablo. Beyond that, the game threatens a few multi-level fetch quests, but they all end up being boss rushes somehow. It tells you that we have to do these 7 tasks, but each task involves killing a boss, and conveniently they're all arranged in a hallway. In fact, that's sort of the theme of the area design in this game. The usual problem with poor RPGs is that every area is a labyrinth, but in this game, every area is basically a hallway. There are a few false paths, but nothing like a maze. Just look at this area, Klimt's tomb in fast motion. Notice how it's all the same? And you encounter bosses along the way from whom you get plot-critical items, but they're all inevitable along that hallway. I hate badly written fetch quests, but somehow the fact that Shenzhen Nanjing has managed to make a badly implemented fetch quest makes me even more angry. I mean, was this game made by human beings? This seemed like a good idea? Had they ever played a video game? Well, I can tell you one thing for certain, they haven't played this game, because it's nigh on unplayable. Most RPGs have designated enemies in each area, which makes for a very simple, if dull, strategy. If you're struggling with the game, grind for experience and levels until you can easily defeat any enemy the game throws your way. Some RPGs instead choose enemies based on the player's level. They scale the enemies to you. When done right, that can be far more engaging, since you can never reach a point where the game becomes totally trivial. When done wrong, the game becomes a frustrating joke. Guess how this game did it? You guessed it. Diablo NES. Levels enemies to you, and the scaling is a total mess. The biggest problem I encountered was actually money. You need to upgrade your equipment to keep up with the enemies, but the amount of money the enemies drop is nowhere near enough to keep your weapons and armor up to snuff, let alone to keep enough healing potions on hand to recover from the damage they deal. Since the enemies level to you, neither of these problems are actually solvable. To get money to buy more armor, you need to fight enemies. In fighting enemies, you gain levels. At higher levels, you need even better armor, and thus more money, because it throws harder enemies at you. To get that money, you need to fight enemies. After level 5 or so, I just couldn't make that cycle work, and ended up cheating and giving myself infinite money, and thus the best equipment and all the potions I could hope for, just to make any progress in the game. Worse yet, only the character who dealt the killing blow against any enemy gets experience for that enemy, and there's no way to skip a turn. So if you're trying to make sure a specific character levels up, if you want to keep your levels equal, you're stuck in Zugzwang, with others always getting the last blow because they're over-leveled. And of course, the enemies are perfectly generic, with no interesting moves or status effects. You have a standard RPG selection of weapons and armor, everything is virtually monochrome, and the music is all probably ripped off music. There are only 3 pieces of music in the game, and while they're all fine, I suppose, hearing the same 3 tunes over and over again will pickle your brain by the time you finish the game. Even boss battles don't get unique music. And on the subject of scaling, the scaling of the bosses is incomprehensible. Since the game is composed mostly of boss rushes masquerading as fetch quests, you get a real feel for the difficulty of the bosses relative to each other, and there's just no logic to it. One boss has an attack all move that does 140 damage to everyone, extremely tough, and then the very next boss does 80 to a single target. The final boss has 3 forms, of which the first is bad, the second is devastating to the point that I had to cheat even more to make it possible, at least for me, and the third is a total pushover. Before you can even get to that final boss, you have to fight 3 bosses in the final layer, and of those, the first is hard, the second was the easiest boss in the entire game. It took me 2 moves, and the third is hard again. They scaled regular enemy statistics badly, but it's like they chose boss statistics completely at random. And jeez, the boss sprites! Does cavorting with Diablo cause bobblehead syndrome? Was this really the character design they thought was appropriate for this game? Or appropriate to steal from Tales of Phantasia anyway. Most of the sprites in this game are stolen directly from Tales of Phantasia specifically. I just can't accept that Diablo's minions look like hydrocephalic Japanese schoolgirls. This is Mephisto. How is this Mephistopheles? And of course, behold, the Dark Wanderer, the hero of yore, inhabited by the spirit of Diablo. It's definitely not Dan Avidan in red tights and a parka, so put that thought out of your mind. It is the Dark Wanderer. Anyway, once we've defeated Ginger Afro Diablo in all his forms, the story wraps up with glitches being vomited onto the screen in lieu of a proper ending cutscene. The end. There's only one other feature worth mentioning, the Horadric Cube. Those familiar with Diablo II undoubtedly know that the Horadric Cube is a crafting system. Certain item recipes merge together to form other, more powerful items. And indeed, the Horadric Cube is actually replicated in this game. It's a bit surreal to see a crafting system in a Nintendo game, but if you're impressed by it, I need to remind you that this game was made at the earliest in 2003. There's nothing actually computationally complicated about a crafting system. There's nothing about a crafting system that makes it difficult to implement on an NES. It just wasn't a game design element that existed in the 1980s, so we're not used to seeing it there. Without any in-game help on what sort of recipes are possible, and with Google Translate translating the ingredient items into a seemingly random assortment of dictionary words, blue, yeah, sadness, I wasn't able to use it for anything other than the items demanded as part of the plot. Besides, I'm not really a fan of formulaic crafting systems. They create an illusion of creativity, but none really exists. And that's all I have to say, so should you play Diablo NES? No, you should not. They've managed to take the least interesting aspect of Diablo 2 and pair it with a shoddy game engine, resulting in a game with no redeeming characteristics whatsoever. Somehow it's stranger than that, though, because it has all of the aspects of a game, all of the parts of a game, and each is taken on its own, done acceptably, but the composite is somehow not even a game. If you explained RPGs to an alien and then gave them a week to write one, they'd come back with this game. It's less a game than a deconstructive study in video gaming, something not to be played, but to be presented as a piece of outsider art, not a source of entertainment, something for people to stare at and go, what is art? What is game? What is Diablo NES? I hope you enjoyed this look at an obscure game. If you did, do leave a like below, and if you want to see more obscure games, subscribe. If you'd like to see my full playthrough of this game with commentary, there's a link in the description below, as well as links to some of the other obscure games I've played. If you have a suggestion for an obscure game you'd like to see me play or review, or just want to say hi, leave a comment. Thank you for watching Obscura Manette.